Okay. All right. David, did you have a special thought to share
Sure, I would like
while
to. A very
traveling?
short one today.
A traveler
Uh,
prayer.
Last month, I should have done the one from Henry the Sixth. Yeah, I mean Henry the Fifth. You know, we few, we happy few, we band of brothers and sisters, because we had so few people. But today, it'll be Kierkegaard. Faith sees best in the dark. Very short today, short and sweet.
The blind leap of faith. That's great. Okay. Thank you. All right. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We give thanks for the mitzvah of busying ourselves with Torah. David, you wanted to start us off with Vayera, which is as of Genesis 18. That's like 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I'm all set to go whenever you are.
I am ready. If everybody else raises their hand and says yes,
all
in favor,
Okay.
vote. All in favor, vote yes. So we're fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes. And the Lord appeared unto him as he sat in the tent door in the heat of the day. 3 men stood over against him. Vayera is Hebrew for he appeared. And it's very interesting to me. It's very interesting to me how God appears in various parts of Scripture. I mean, there's the still small voice that most of us are familiar with. And in Exodus, which we were studying with Marty's group, God appears as a burning bush. But in this case, God appears as 3 visitors, 3 men who come in. And they are very upset with what's going on with these cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, where there are a lot of problems. And I'm going to try to be able to read from my notes here as Wendy's driving over the hills and dales.
Yeah, the rough roads.
And if I fall out of the car, then you just know. It'll probably be a lot easier to read if I fall out of the car. Okay. Anyway, this portion is from Genesis 18 to the start of Genesis 18 to Genesis 22, 24. And it tells the stories of these 3 visitors. And I wanted to say a little bit about the possible sites. I was talking with Marty a few weeks ago about research being done in which archaeologists think they have found the remains of the city of Sodom. And of course, these are cities that were destroyed in a rain of fire. And when you think about the rain of fire, that could easily be translated either as a volcanic eruption of some sort or the impact of a comet or a meteorite, an asteroid that would have, it didn't even need to hit, it could have just exploded in an airburst. And that could have actually caused something that would actually cause the destruction of those 2 cities. And the ancient Greek historiographer Strabo, he says that locals meeting near Masada, which is not the Masada that we're all familiar with, that's a different spelling, says that there were once 13 inhabited cities in the region of which Sodom was the metropolis. And he actually identifies a limestone hill right at the southwestern tip of the Dead Sea. And so that is possibly one of the possible sites where the biblical Sodom was. Or first reading,
excuse me, it's right near where the Dead Sea works.
Yeah,
the factories where they're doing the desalination projects out of the Dead Sea. It's
yeah.
right across the main road from there.
Okay, that is one of the possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
The first reading, going back to Genesis, Abraham is sitting at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day, and he has the air conditioner on, but it's pretty hot down there. And he looks up and he saw God in the form of three men. And he ran, he bowed to the ground, and he welcomed them. And he offered to wash their feet, and they assented to that. And he rushed to Sarah's tent to order cakes, etc. And in Genesis 18, verse 9, there were dots above the letters that said that seemed to be speaking to him. And one of the visitors told Abraham that he would return the next year and that Sarah would have a son. And Sarah thought, oh, yeah, give me a break, because she laughed to herself at the prospect with her husband being almost 100 years old. And you said a 100-year-old does not sire a son. And so then God asked Abraham, why was Sarah laughing at bearing a child at her age? And he says that nothing was too wondrous for God. The second reading, give me a second. The second reading, Sarah is now quite frightened. She denied laughing, but God insisted that she had. And the men set out toward Sodom. Abram walked with them to see them off. And God considered whether to confide in Abraham to let him know what God was about to do. Since God had singled out Abraham to become a great nation and to teach his posterity to keep God's way by doing what is just and what is right. And God told Abraham that the outrage and sin of Sodom and Gomorrah was so great that God was going to see whether they had acted according to the outcry that had reached God. The third reading, Lot is sitting at the gate of Sodom. Two angels arrived, and Lot greeted them, and Lot invited the angels to spend the night. And Lot goes outside the entrance, shuts the door behind him, and begs the men of Sodom not to misbehave. And he even offered the men his two virgin daughters if they would not do anything to his guests. But they disparaged Lot as one who had come as an alien and now sought to rule them, and they pressed threateningly against them. The visitors stretched out their hands. They grabbed Lot, put him back in the house, shut the door, and struck the people with blindness so that they would be unable to find the door. And the visitors directed Lot to bring what family he had out of the city. And Lot told his sons-in-law that they needed to get out of the place because he knew that God was about to destroy it. But again, Lot's sons-in-law thought he was joking around. In the fourth reading, the sun is rising, and they're also seeing the extreme haze that is, as something is definitely wrong with the atmosphere around Sodom and Gomorrah. And God rained sulfurous fire from heaven on Sodom and Gomorrah and annihilated the entire plain. Lot's wife was told not to look back, but she did anyway. And of course, she turned into the famous pillar of salt. Can I have some salt later on?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
I won't look back.
Okay, and you won't look back. Lot was afraid to dwell in Zoar, so he settled in the cave in the Kill country with his two daughters. The older daughter told the younger daughter that their father was old, and there's not a man on earth with whom to have children. So she proposed, it's quite a story here, she proposed that they get Lot drunk, have sex with him, so that he might maintain life through their father. And that night they indeed made their father drunk with wine. The older one lay with her father, without his being aware of it. The next day, the older one persuaded the younger to do the same. The two daughters thus had children by their father. In the fifth reading, Abraham is now 100 years old when Isaac is finally born. And Sarah remarked that God had brought her laughter, and everyone would laugh with her about her bearing Abraham a child in his old age. And God would also make a nation of Ishmael as well. And I believe you all remember years ago, right after the 9/11 disaster in New York City, the West Wing did a special episode called Isaac and Ishmael, and they're the founders, in a way, of two of the world's great religions. In the sixth reading, the chief of his troops asked Abraham not to swear, not to deal falsely with them. Abraham reproached Abimelech because the servants had seized Abraham's well, but he protested ignorance. In the seventh reading, God is about to test Abraham in one of the most important sections of all of Genesis. And he directs him to take Isaac to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering. Now, I discussed this. Some of you may have heard of Rabbi Shem Tov. Rabbi Shem Tov lives in the Vale area, and he and I have become friends. And he is an Orthodox rabbi. And we were actually discussing last week, during his visit, about the attempted sacrifice of Isaac. And I made the point that as Abraham is binding Isaac, about to sacrifice him, he is extremely upset, which would be expected, but he's doing as God commands. And Rabbi Shem Tov argued no, because in Orthodox tradition, you're supposed to obey God's will with enthusiasm, so that Abraham was actually enthusiastically going about his business. And I guess we just agreed to disagree at that particular point. And on the third day, Abraham sees the place on Mount Moriah from afar, and Abraham took the firestone and the knife, put the wood on Isaac, and Isaac asked Abraham where the sheep was for the burnt offering. God would see to the sheep for the burnt offering. They arrived at the place that God had named. Abraham built an altar, laid out the wood, bound Isaac, laid him on the altar, and finally picked up the knife to slay him. At the very last minute, the angel calls to Abraham, and he says, "Do not raise your hand against the boy," because God now knew that Abraham feared God, since he had not withheld his son. And that brings us to the end of this portion. The Haftorah is, for the Ashkenazi Jews, it's from the second book of Kings, and they're called a certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets until Elisha. And the Parsha both tell of God's gift of the sons to childless women. And I think that brings us to the end of this portion. And now, with thanks, I return the meeting to our rabbi. And thank you for letting me.
Thank you very much, Professor, and Wendy, for allowing him to concentrate. In other words, on your journey, you will continue to pre-veil, or now post-veil, because you've left veil.
Yeah.
Avail yourselves and on your travail, and et cetera, et cetera. Thank you, David. Okay.
And thank you. Wendy is the better driver, and I'll be here until we get to the appointment.
Okay. All right. Hopefully, it won't be too bumpy of a road. All right. Gary has Chaye Sarah, which means the life of Sarah, that continues immediately after the binding of Isaac story that David was concluding the previous portion with. Gary, please.
Yes, and it's in Genesis 23:1 to 25:48. And it begins with talking about Sarah's lifespan, in the span of her lifespan, 127 years, and that she died in, I won't pronounce this right probably, well, now Hebron, I can pronounce that.
Yeah, right, right.
And Abraham proceeds to mourn, and then he seeks out a place to bury her, and he goes before the Hittites and requests that the group help him solicit the cave in the area that he wants from Ephron, who just happens to be in the group there, and steps forward and seems very happy to give him. Okay, louder. Seems very happy to grant his request and gives him a whole portion of his fields and the cave that's on the one border of his property there, for him to bury Sarah at that site. That's sort of the opening of it. And then
Gary, let me just interject one thing. There's question back and forth as to whether Ephron gives it to Abraham, or does Abraham purchase it?
Abraham wants to purchase it. Yeah,
right.
Good point. Abraham insists on purchasing it.
Yeah.
There was an interesting conversation there, but he seems determined that it's to be his property. He wants to do it, and he does want to purchase it. Paid out to Ephraim the money that he had named in the hearing to the Hittites. So he had actually suggested to the Hittites that he wanted to purchase it, and then Ephraim did not require that, but he named out the amount, which was 400 shekels of silver at the going merchant's rate. That is, I guess, wherever the Fed says it is,
wherever
So
whatever the market will bear.
So Ephraim's land in Machpelah, am I close on that? Near Marm, the field with its cave and all the trees anywhere within the confines of the field passed to Abraham as his possession, and that deal was made in the presence of all the Hittites. So so it was clearly a done deal, and everybody witnessed it. And then he buries his wife Sarah in the cave of the field, facing Hebron in the land of Canaan. Thus the field with its cave passed from the Hittites to Abraham as a burial site, not just for Sarah, but we'll see later. Abraham is now old, advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed him with many things. He brings forth his senior servant in the household and gives him instructions that he wants to get his son Isaac. It's time for him to get married. He's lost his mother, and he's struggling with that loss. So he instructs him and has him, which I find interesting, has him, I guess it's a way of them making a promise or a commitment, put his hand under Abraham's thigh and commit to him that he will not take Isaac back to his homeland, but he wants the senior servant to go back to his homeland, and he takes, I believe, nine camels with him, with all kinds of gifts and all kinds of his bounty, and that he will be guided in finding a wife for Isaac when he gets back there. His senior servant does so, and when he gets back outside of the city of Nahor, 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 out just outside the city, he stops and has camels by a well, and waits there to see what happens. And what happens is that, I guess typically in the evening times, the women come out and draw water from the well, and he's looking for one particular woman that he's told he'll be guided to, and that woman is Rebecca, and she comes out and is greeting him. Not that she doesn't know him, but this is just what he's to expect. And she also offers to water his camels at that point. Well, he ends up going back, invites him back to the home. He goes back to the home and meets her family. And, the short of it is that he ends up bringing Rebecca back to Isaac to have Isaac meet her. He does meet her. He takes her into his mother's tent, who has now passed away, obviously, and gets to know her and does take her as his wife. Now Abraham takes another wife, Keturah, if I pronounced it right.
Right.
Keturah. And basically it says at this point he takes another wife. I don't know if that's just one too many or what, but he's 175 years old at this point, and he breathes his last breath. And Isaac and Ishmael end up burying Abraham in the cave where Sarah was, and that's kind of where it all ends.
Okay, two quick things, Gary. Two quick comments that well, actually three. One is that the midrash, the commentaries are replete with trying to fill in some of the blanks here. The stories lack all kind of detail. So, for example, Sarah dies immediately after the sentences that concluded the story of Abraham almost sacrificing, almost slaying the son. And one explanation is that she saw Abraham returning from Mount Moriah by himself, or only with the servants and with no Isaac, and she assumes the worst, and she has a heart attack and dies of grief immediately at that point. Why else would those two stories be linked together? Another particular sentence or two, verse or two, that the rabbis and the storytellers go crazy with is the servant, the head of the household, as you say, Eliezer. When Abraham tells him to go to Nahor and find a wife for Isaac, he goes, I was hoping he was going to tell me that Isaac would marry my daughter. But that's why Abraham makes a point of saying, no, it's got to be from the family, no intermarriage, things like that. And Eliezer at first is very upset about that, but then ultimately he prays to God, to Abraham's God. Is this the right thing that I should do? Lead me along the way. And as you said, that point me in the right direction to find Rebecca. Rebecca does the little extra of offering to water the camels, and Eliezer said, "Oh, my daughter wouldn't do that." I didn't train her to be like that. So okay, I accept Rebecca. Rebecca comes back, and Isaac sees her, and it's love at first sight, and she sees him, and it's love at first sight, and she falls off the camel, because she's so excited and in love, et cetera, et cetera. So there are lots of extra illustration, if you will, that goes along with that story. Okay, thanks, Gary, and thanks, David. We come to the portion known as Toldot, which is now in the middle of chapter 25 of Genesis, and Isaac and Rebecca have been married. by that act of him bringing her into his mother's tent, into the home. That's considered an act of marriage. They didn't have any kind of a ceremony at that point. Rebecca becomes pregnant with twins, and she complains to God why the twins are fighting in her womb. They're battling, and God responds to her that that's an indication that they will be two nations that will always be in battle with each other. Esau is born first. He's hairy. He's reddish, and he's also known as Edom or Adam or Adom, which means red. And becomes the people of Edom, which later on, coincidentally, becomes the rabbinic euphemism for Rome. And never really understood how they got from Esau to Rome, as opposed to some of the other pan-Arab tribes. And Esau is described ultimately as he grows up as a very skillful hunter. Then Jacob is born holding on to Esau's heel, which is what the word Yaakov really means, to grasp onto his brother's heel. He's described as being quiet, as being contemplative, and later on we would call him a mama's boy, so to speak. You remember the famous story that Esau comes back from the hunt and he's famished, whereas Jacob is preparing a lentil stew, and Esau says, "Give me some of the stew." And Jacob says, "Well, give me your birthright. Give me the role of being firstborn, so that I may inherit the leadership of the clan." Esau says, "Well, what good is that birthright to me when I'm dying of hunger? Here, you can have it. That's fine." And so that's the first indication that Esau spurns his birthright, so to speak. The next story is that Isaac, incidentally, is the one of the patriarchs, one of the three patriarchs, who never leaves Canaan or Canaan. He never leaves the borders of the Promised Land. He visits Avimelech or Abimelech, however you want to pronounce it, who's the king of the Philistines. They lived in the area of Gerar in the Negev. And a similar story as with Abraham, that Isaac lies to the king and says that Rebecca is his sister rather than his wife. But that impresses Abimelech, and he offers protection to Isaac, and they establish a relationship, ultimately a peace treaty, if you will, by which Isaac will prosper. The landowners of the Philistines resent that agreement. So Abimelech tells Isaac, go back to your home, go back to Beersheba, which was your metropolis, so to speak. It didn't have that name at that point, but the king tells him to go back and avoid any confrontation with his populace, and they shake hands on a peace treaty, as it will. Which is why another reason why the place is called Beersheba. There are 7 wells there. Be'er is a well, and Sheva is the number 7. But it's also, if you think of the holiday of Shavuot, a Sheva or Shavua is an oath or a promise. So there's the notion that it gets that the name of the place is further strengthened, that was the oasis, or that was the well by which Isaac and Abimelech established their peace treaty between the Israelites and, well, not Israelites yet, the Hebrews and the Philistines. A little bit later on, another famous story, Rebecca, hearing that Isaac who is now almost blind, but Isaac wants to have a formal bestowal of the rights of leadership of the clan onto his son, and Isaac prefers Esau, but Rebekah prefers Jacob. So Isaac and Rebekah Jacob and Rebekah trick Isaac into giving him the blessing and the formal leadership. When Esau hears about it, he threatens to kill Jacob. Eventually, we'll get there in a minute, eventually Rebekah convinces Jacob that Esau is serious about his threats and that Jacob probably should leave and go back to her family's household and reestablish himself there. Esau does convince Isaac to give him a blessing, which he does, but he doesn't confer upon him leadership of the Hebrew clan, and as a result, immediately the story says that Esau married two Hittite women. That's the same tribe of the Canaanites that Gary was talking about, from which Abraham had purchased the cave, the burial cave, that upset his parents deeply. And then Rebekah conspires to send Jacob back to her family in Padan Aram to find a wife. And when Esau hears that, he does one further at his parents and marries one of the daughters of Ishmael. So that's how all of them become connected. And in the Arab history, if you will, Ishmael, then his line from Abraham is continued through Esau, who was one of the sons of Isaac. And that story then moves on as Jacob goes on his journey, just like David and Wendy are heading towards a doctor's office. But Jacob is going to find his fate in with the family of his mother Rebekah. That takes us into the final portion that we're going to deal with. I'll deal with a little more extensively, called Vayetze Yaakov mi Beersheba. Jacob sojourns away from Beersheba and heads towards where Rebekah, the Padan Aram, and where Rebekah's family lives. He has a number of experiences along the way, the most famous of which at the start of his journey is that he lays down in a particular place. Luz was the name of the place. That's not as important, but he lays down, puts a rock underneath his head, and he falls asleep and dreams of a ladder or a staircase that goes up to heaven, and there are angels going up and down the ladder, the staircase. When he wakes up, he says these famous words of God is in this place, and I did not know it. We'll come back and talk about that phrase in a couple minutes. But God is in this place, and I didn't know it. God promises to protect him on his journey, that it will be a successful journey. He will have his own trials and experiences, or similar to David and Wendy, he will have his own travails. Sorry about that, but he will have his experiences. And Jacob names the place Beth El, Beit El, a house of God, if you will. Jacob continues, and in a similar story, because like Gary told us, it seems to be a natural pattern of boy meets girl at the well kind of thing. Jacob gets to the area of Nahor and sees all the women, the girls, the young maidens out drawing water. and one of them approaches him and welcomes him. Again, it's kind of a love at first sight. It's Rachel who is welcoming Jacob, and she takes him back to meet her father, Laban, Laban. They want to get married. Jacob offers to work for Laban for 7 years because he can't really pay the bride price. So he offers to work for 7 years. At the end of the 7 years, on what should be his marriage night or wedding night, Laban substitutes Leah, who is Rachel's older sister. How could you do this? Everybody asks the father, how could you do this? Why could you do this? Nobody asks Jacob, didn't you realize it wasn't the woman that you thought you were going to be marrying? Anyway, and the Midrash steps in and says that Rachel joined, once she heard that was Laban's plan, Rachel had to agree with her father, and Rachel taught Leah how she should act and behave so as to be able to fool Jacob into thinking that it was really Rachel. Jacob accepts Leah as a wife because in those days you could have more than one. And he goes back to Laban and says, well, but I really want Rachel. Laban says, well, okay, work for 7 more years. So 7 more years, and then finally he does marry Rachel. In the interim, both Rachel and Leah had provided their handmaidens to Jacob as semi-wives, if you will, not just concubines, but they had the status of being wives also. And all of the different children are born until finally Jacob and Rachel are married, and they do have the son Joseph first, and then Benjamin immediately afterwards, or several years afterwards. Gary, I remembered there was one more thing that I wanted to point out, and I skipped it at first. When Abraham remarries, and he marries Keturah, there's a strain of tradition that says that Keturah was actually Hagar, was actually Ishmael's mother, the one whom whom Sarah had sent away, but Abraham still loved her and sought her out after Sarah's death. And after Isaac was all taken care of, he sought her out and convinced her to come back with him. She converts, and joins the Hebrew community, etc. So Keturah, in Jewish tradition, there's no documentation for it, but Keturah, the legend is that's really Hagar coming back. Okay, so all of the different, what we call the Israelites, although Jacob isn't Israel yet, but the sons of Jacob, or the children of Jacob, because there is one daughter, Dinah, all of them are born to first Leah, then Bilhah, who's her maidservant, then Zilpah, who's Rachel's maidservant, and finally to Rachel herself. That's Joseph, who will be the favorite because Rachel was the favorite wife. Ultimately, Jacob wishes to return to Beersheba and to the Hebrew side of the clan, but Laban has one more deceitful practice, and in response to kind of show up her father a little bit, Rachel steals one of his idols because she is giving up idolatry totally. Ultimately, the sons, the brothers, everyone comes back after each other. It looks as if there's going to be a major confrontation, and there may even be a battle between all of them. But ultimately, Jacob and Laban shake on it. They establish a peace treaty. They set up a pillar of stones to mark a demarcation point between the territory of Jacob and his clan, if you will, extended clan, and Laban and his extended clan also. Kind of a little bit of set the stage. That's the prequel for what we will encounter in the next week's portion, which is Jacob being blessed as Israel, and his name is changed to Israel, which is how we get the Bnei Yaakov, or the children of, or the sons of children of Jacob, become Bnei Yisrael, the children or the sons of Israel, as Jacob's name is changed. In English, that becomes Israelites, if you ever wondered where that word would come from. But the ites, I-T-E-S ending literally also means children of or descendants of. So those who followed in the line of Jacob. Okay, so that's the summary. I want to go back for a couple of minutes now with some of the insights that I've learned, especially those of you who've been with me on this journey through the Torah. I like to go back and study the teachings and the writings of my teacher at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, Nechama Leibovich. So go back to that story of Jacob's dream, and there's this ladder or this staircase going up to heaven, and it says that the angels were ascending and descending. Now, the immediate question, obviously, is wouldn't we expect the angels to be descending first from heaven and then going back up after having visited and blessed Jacob? Okay, the tradition, especially Rashi, who's the ultimate biblical commentator in Jewish tradition, Rashi says no, that there are two sets of angels. There were the angels who had accompanied Jacob when he was in the land of Israel, so to speak, or in the part of Canaan where the Hebrew tribes and clan lived. There was one set of angels. But then when he reached the border to get into Nahor's territory, then those angels went up, and another set of angels, the angels that look out for the Hebrews, look out for the Jews outside of Israel, outside of the Promised Land, they now could accompany Jacob on the rest of his journey. And how does Rashi prove that? Rashi always has a proof text. He doesn't just make it up. It's not just his own legend or fantasy or whatever. He has to find a proof text. So his proof text is that he jumps to the end of the story when Jacob comes back to his own territory, and it's actually chapter 33, verse 2, where he says, where God says, or the text says, that the angels of God met him as he came back into their territory. Excuse me, 1 minute, my wife is calling. Can I call him back? I can't.
What would be a good time for him to call you back, where we could actually connect? Okay, can you call back in like anytime after an hour from now?
Even after a half hour.
Half hour, you said, even
Yeah.
after a half an hour. It would be great. Teaching.
Okay, I'm sorry. We're trying to deal with this leak that we had. Okay. So again, when Jacob comes back, it's at a place called Machanayim, which means two camps. That was the camp of Laban's people and the camp of Jacob's people. The text actually says that the angels of God met him there. So Rashi says, aha, see, those are the angels that accompanied Jacob when he was in the Promised Land, as opposed to the to the others. Okay. Another question that Rashi asks is, the text says that there was this ladder, the staircase, if you will, up to heaven. The angels are going up and down, and God stood there, or God was positioned there. The Hebrew is alav, which would be translated as on him or on it. And nobody has an answer to exactly what is that supposed to mean. Is that still in the dream? Is that still a recognition that that Jacob has, that God, again, God is in this place by using that word alav? Was God beside him? Was God with him? Was God standing on the staircase, on the ladder, counting the angels up and down? There are all kinds of different allusions and stories that come out of there. There's one angel that says, "Oh, can't I go? Can't I continue to go with him? I don't want to go back up to heaven. I want to stay here," et cetera, et cetera. It's fascinating stuff. All right. So Jacob says when he wakes up, and this is chapter 28, verses 20 to 22, is a very famous statement and an idea, some of which is troubling. Much of it is inspirational and complex. Jacob says, God is in this place and I did not know it. He also makes a vow that if God will be with me on my journey, and if he will protect me, then I will accept him as my God. This is proof, and I will swear and offer a tenth, a tithe to God. But God will be my God. That's the important thing. Okay. So the first phrase, and any of you who really want to delve into that one phrase of God is in this place and I did not know it, I would refer you to a book written, or it's actually a collection, an interpretation written by Rabbi Larry Kushner, Kushner, who's a Reform rabbi. He's a mystic. He actually grew up in Detroit. I didn't know him growing up, but I knew his parents. They were still members of the temple that I was at in Detroit. And what Larry Kushner does is he breaks down that phrase. Surely God is in this place, and I did not know it. And by looking at each word, or how to parse out and punctuate the particular text in Hebrew or in English, he comes up with like 10 different insights into what that story could mean for Jacob or for any of us. Just one example. There's obviously what we call the Parashat. There's the simple level. I have a new understanding of God because through this dream, and through this this inspirational experience that I have. But there's also an interesting little play because of the Hebrew words. In Hebrew, the pronoun I is actually doubled here. Okay, surely God is in this place, and I did not know. So Larry Kushner does a whole thing based on, so it's not only as a result of this, do I understand God or do I know God? I now know myself. I did not know, okay, until this point. So he goes into in some of these chapters of what did Jacob learn more about himself because of this experience, and how does that relate to us? So I refer you to it. Maybe when we come around to it next year, we'll try to do a whole adult education session just on that phrase, just on the different explanations, different commentators, and Hasidic rabbis, and whatever, of how they understand that phrase. There's also a lot of debate and discussion about the end of Jacob's statement, which is it appropriate for someone to bargain with God or to make this deal with God? If you will protect me on my journey, if you'll make sure that I arrive safely, if it will be an experience of prosperity and sustenance and happiness and whatever, then I will choose you as my God. I will accept you as my God, and I will pledge a tithe to you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Is that a valid Jewish thing? And so the rabbis go back and forth as to whether we're allowed to bargain with God. Can we do the same kind of thing? God, if you give me health, if you protect me, if you protect my family, if you make sure that my daughter-in-law who's pregnant has a successful and safe and healthy baby, and then I'll give you an extra $20 million, whatever it might be. Is that a valid Jewish behavior and pattern? After all, if Jacob, one of the patriarchs, Jacob, whose name is Israel, if he could do that, is that something that we should do? Okay, or is it a declarative sentence? Rather, is Jacob not saying out there, if he's saying because God has promised to protect me, then I accept that, and I know that my part of the breach, my part of the agreement, my part of the bargain, so to speak, is to be a good person, be righteous, etc., and give a tithe. There are some people who focus on the 10%, but that's the best indication of a follower of God. So a lot of it goes into that how you translate that one word, which usually means if God will do this, but it also could mean as God does this, so will I do that, or when God does this, I will do that. However you want to translate it. It's traditionally understood, and I looked at a number of different commentators, and Nechama Leibovich summarizes a bunch of them. The majority opinion traditionally, believe it or not, and you hear people say, oh, well, we can't really change around anything in the Torah. Okay, the Torah is perfect, it's immutable, and the words and the chronology and the names, et cetera, are all perfect because God wrote it. But that was not the pattern in the way that all the medieval commentators and all the rabbis through the centuries. That's not the way that they approach the text. They approach the text as something to be played with and moved around. And there's no, you've heard the phrase, there's no past, there's no present, there's no future, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So most of the rabbis, when they look at Jacob's phrase here about trying to make a deal with God, they understood that the order is reversed. Okay, Jacob is really saying, I prayed for God's protection. God did protect me, as demonstrated by everything that I experienced. I emerged healthy. Ultimately, the adjective is shalem, from shalom. I emerged from all this experience, the 20 years with Lavan, and so I emerged, and that was God's answer. Okay, I prayed, but the answer wasn't going to come immediately. The answer had to be through the experience. So that's point number one. Point number two is the relationship or the dealings back and forth between Jacob and his father-in-law and Laban. And we have to remember, go back now into the story that Gary was telling of Abraham sending Eliezer to find a wife for Isaac, to find Rebecca. Okay, so Laban, according to the commentators and the Midrash and all this, Laban remembered he had witnessed how Eliezer, when he came to find a bride, Eliezer came with camels and wealth and treasures and and jewelry and all this kind of stuff that he offered to Rebecca's father. So he assumed that was the pattern of Isaac's and of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob's tribe and family, that's what was going to happen. So when he first met Jacob, he assumed he was going to become very rich, that Jacob was wealthy, that Jacob had come bearing gifts also. And so they pick up on the phrase, I don't remember, I don't have the exact quote here, but that Laban ran to meet him, meaning Jacob. He embraced him and he kissed him. But Laban, we know, is a trickster, is filled with deceit. And so Rashi, again, the prime commentator saw and follows up and says, well, Laban ran to meet him, and when he didn't see that Jacob had this whole retinue of camels and a caravan and this and that and da 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 da. So what did he do next? He embraced him. He hugged him to feel if Jacob had anything in his pockets. Okay, what did you bring? So da, 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 bride price, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What did you bring? And when he couldn't feel anything in the hug, then he kissed him to see if maybe he had hidden some pearls or jewels or whatever in his mouth. Okay, and then when he's so disappointed, okay, that ultimately he then says, and this is chapter 29, verse 14, he says, oh well, atzmiu v'sariyata. Okay, I welcome you because you're my kin. You're mishpucha, as they say in Yiddish. Okay, you're a member. You're an MOT. You're a member of the tribe. But I was really hoping that you were bringing a lot of treasure for my daughter also. Okay, so when they leave after the 20 years, when they leave, Jacob and his wives, and that's the four wives, that's Leah and Zilpah and Bilhah and Zilpah and then Rachel, they refuse to publicly humiliate or embarrass Laban. They're aware of all of his trickery. They're disappointed by his trickery. They're angry at his trickery, but they won't publicly humiliate him. And so again, the rabbi, and here especially, it's the tradition that we call musar. I wish Michael Gervan was here, but it's the tradition of literature that focuses on ethical behavior. What musar is traditional ethical behavior, and they say that all of us in our lives will have to deal with deceitful people who try to exploit us, people who try to take advantage of us, whatever it is, and they develop, especially the Chafetz Chaim, one of the Lithuanian rabbis, is most famous for listing, and I will share with you the 7 conditions to be met when before you would expose or before you would openly criticize a deceitful person. Okay, so they pick up on the story of how Jacob and his wives, of how they responded to Laban. and then they develop, not that Jacob and his cohorts were perfect in their response, but Chofetz Chaim and other rabbis developed this pattern in the Musar, the ethical literature, on what should we do, how do you respond when you've been when you're tempted to expose or make public something or a series of things, that the behavior of a deceitful person. So in order, okay, just to share with you, the first is you must be absolutely sure that there's hard evidence, not just rumors of the deceitful behavior. Okay, you must have either experienced it yourself or have hard evidence that this is truly what happened. Secondly, you have to take the time to sleep on it, literally. You have to think about it. You have to ponder what all the different consequences could be. And incidentally, that's a major principle of Jewish law, is before a court can issue any verdict or any punishment, the judges
Maybe we'll call Ken and just double check with him.
render a verdict on the same day that the trial ends in Jewish jurisprudence. The judge, the jury, or however the three judges, usually three rabbis, they must see if the verdict is verdict and / punishment. If it's announced on the same day as the close of the trial, it's automatically invalid. Okay. So this follows the same thing. That before you expose someone who has acted against you deceitfully, you must think about it. You must sleep on it. Third is that you make a point of approaching the individual or individuals privately, and you explain to them how you understand the behavior that was wrong, that was hurtful, and you must encourage them to seek teshuvah, to seek repentance. And if we think back to Yom Kippur, there's a whole long list of behaviors that indicate authentic teshuvah, authentic repentance. Then fourth is before you are tempted to expose a deceitful person, is you should write down what it is that you're going to say, so that there's no exaggeration. It's what was the TV show that, just the facts, ma'am, just the facts? Was that Dragnet? I don't.
Yeah.
Only the facts, just the facts, kind of thing. Then number 5 is you must spend extra time in self-examination of your own motives for exposing the person. Is there ongoing resentment? Is there ongoing anger? Is there ongoing envy or jealousy? Whatever it is, make sure that your motivations are pure and that you're not going to personally benefit in any way from exposing someone as deceitful or as a cheater or exploitative or whatever it might be. Okay. Number 6 is explore all possible avenues to resolve the issue without going public. Okay. Is there any other way? Is there any other influence, any other power, any other authority that could be brought into the situation so that it doesn't have to go public? And that part B of that is to ensure that there's no possibility of what Jewish tradition calls lashon hara, of gossip or slander, because ultimately lashon hara, rumor or gossip or slander is as serious of a charge against you as murder. Killing someone's reputation is just as serious as killing them physically. So number 6 is very important also, to explore all other possible ways and make sure that there's no leaning towards lashon hara, towards slander or rumor or gossip. And then finally, the Musar would say, if you're dealing with someone who has tricked you, who has deceived you, who have exploited you, whatever, and you are in a position where you can exact punishment, the punishment that you levy cannot exceed what the norms of civil society would impose. In other words, you would, if it's up to you to exact a punishment or a consequence, you consult with an attorney, with a judge, whoever it might be, as if this were a public case. If it came to trial and the person was found guilty, what would the punishment be? You may not individually expect punishment from the one who has wronged you that's any worse than what the civil courts or civil society would impose. So that's the way that they develop further some of the lessons, and that's not only from the commentators and the Chama Leibovich, but also from the Musar literature, which is a body of literature. Again, I'm kind of leading in or giving you some examples of things that hopefully in the late winter and into the spring, we'll have a couple sessions of looking at some of the Musar literature and the ethical writings that they have.